Hello everyone, thank you all so much for having me. I think this evening we've already heard a number of really inspiring talks about women in science and the many different ways a scientific life can look like. So I would now like to add to these stories by sharing my own. I would like to share with you my path into marine biology, drawing on themes such as curiosity, family influences, and how an international career can gradually emerge. And this talk is not at all meant as a template, but rather as like a personal account, I guess, of how a career can also grow in unexpected and sometimes quite non-linear ways. So on this slide, you actually see a bit of a glimpse of where my path started. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see me as a little child with my family during a beach holiday in Denmark. I'm the one showing her tummy. And on the right-hand side, you see me a little bit older with a haircut that my dad was very enthusiastic about. Now, my parents both very much loved the outdoors. My mum was and still is to this date a very avid gardener, and my dad always loved to go for long walks in the woods, and he would like to take me with him, and he would always encourage me to ask questions, and I asked many. And I still think, like, going back in time, thinking at these sort of early experiences, that this was really, these questions, the observations, it was really my first sort of introduction into scientific thinking. And so with this curiosity in place, I was actually absolutely sure by the age of 15 that I wanted to become a biologist. And so, I grew up in Göttingen. It's a small little town in Germany. It really felt natural for me that after I finished my school that I would join the local university to study biology, and that's what I did. And I studied among 30,000 other students in Göttingen. It was a great place, and I could study all sorts of different disciplines in biology because my interests at this time were still really broad. This really changed when I went for 2 months to Borneo during one of my semester breaks, and that was the time when I learned how to dive. And seeing for the first time life underwater was really, I returned and I knew after that experience that I didn't just want to study biology, but that I wanted to become a marine biologist. And so to put that a little bit into practice, I actually moved to Hamburg and I started a master's degree studying fisheries science and hydrobiology, and I was really fortunate enough at the time to spend a lot of my time on these big European research vessels like the Walter Herwig 3, surveying fish stocks and also learning ocean science and practice. And despite kind of getting incredibly seasick on these journeys, I also realized that I really loved being out at sea. But to put my diving skills to a little bit more use, and I was also quite adventurous my whole life, I applied for government funding to go to Australia, really far away, and it was granted. And that allowed me to spend the last year of my master's degree at the University of Adelaide studying this little guy here, the magpie perch, and I was able to study this while diving around the island that you see on the right-hand side of the slide, West Island, which was a field station of the University of Adelaide. So this is where I spent the last year of my master's degree, my thesis work, and I got to really learn the ropes of experimental ecology in the field. Moving countries and moving to the other side of the world was quite a challenging year, I have to say, but it really had quite a profound influence on me, both academically and personally, because I grew and learned a lot. Now here you see some snapshots. I spent many days diving in the cold waters of West Island, often among seals and also sharks, which definitely kept things exciting. And I also developed during these long days quite a unique fashion sense. You see me here on the left-hand side wearing a purple dry suit, which I secretly was hoping would repel sharks. And you also can see quite a nervous smile on my face because I was just about to jump in the water with my spear gun to spear some fish. And then you see me on the right-hand side of the slide sorting those fish samples into formalin tubes. And I was wearing my pajama pants there still, so it really shows fieldwork is really not always all that glamorous. All of these experiences, though, like diving underwater in these cold waters, being exposed to seals and sharks, and designing my first experiments all led to my first publication. And it really felt like a real scientist for the first time. And it really set me up also to start the next chapter of my scientific life, which was to move to New Zealand, to the University of Auckland, and begin a PhD. And I studied New Zealand triple fin fishes for my PhD. New Zealand actually has the highest number of triple fin species in the world, and triple fins are also New Zealand's most abundant reef fish. And so the question of my PhD was simple. It was why there are so many species of triple fins in New Zealand. And so I spent the next years diving underwater all around New Zealand. I looked at over 20,000 of these fish, really trying to understand the processes that could explain the extraordinary diversity. And after that, I took a little bit of a deep breath and did some thinking, because I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do next. I wanted to do a postdoc, but I was also really aware that the small research funds that you have early on in your career wouldn't pay for a research vessel and all the diving that I would have to do. And I also thought a little bit, I think, that the green was always, the grass was always greener on the other side. And I was sort of thinking about, why don't I become a terrestrial ecologist? Because all they need clearly is like petrol for a field car and a butterfly net. And I could afford that. So actually I did that. So I applied for funding, I moved to Sweden, and I started to work on damselflies. I really took a leap in my career. And I was studying these beautiful damselflies that you see here that are found all over Europe. And I was trying for the next years to understand what was actually impacting their distribution and how climate change is impacting their distribution. Now, after that, that research was a lot cheaper and I really enjoyed it, but I had another bit, of a time where I had to sort of pause and think. And that was, I realized that being a postdoc in yet another country, after having already moved to Australia and then New Zealand, now in Sweden, was actually really hard. It was also the time when I had my first 2 children, and a lot of the support available in Sweden at that time was only available in Swedish. And so I felt this great sense of isolation at that time. And I was on parental leave, and I spent a few months really thinking about, well, what do I want to do about this? And that's why it shows a photograph here, I decided, try to change what you can change, accept the rest, but really try to take it into your own hands. And that's what I did. I returned from parental leave, and I actually started to really get active. I organized things. I put my hand up and said, yes, I'm going to do this. And so I started to organize, for instance, a seminar series, and it really helped me grow my network. I also became part of the postdoc society, and I organized training for other postdocs. I did some training. I also became the organizer of the STEM network for the university. I contributed to teaching and all of that. And it really had an impact, not just to my career, but also to how supported and connected I felt. And my career really took a turn then, and things got a lot better. And I worked the next years, and one of the big achievements was, for instance, getting an award from the King in Sweden for my contributions to biodiversity research. And it really felt like, wow, this is really going well. My career is going well, and I really feel much more connected, and I can do things. Shortly after, however, I got promoted to associate professor, and I got a really big grant to grow my group, and I had lots of students. Another unexpected event actually happened that changed a little bit my trajectory, and that was my partner at the time got offered a job at Plant and Food Research, and they offered me a job as well, and that was actually an opportunity too good to decline. So we packed our bags again, and we moved to New Zealand, to Nelson, and I also had, shortly after, my 3rd child. And it was quite a career change for me because I had learned a lot of skills, but now this time I really had to focus it to the seafood sector, and that's what I did. So with a focus on fisheries management and aquaculture. And it is really something that I grew quite passionate about, and I've also became a real advocate for. As you just heard before, you know, I tried to apply all the tools I had learned in the previous years, even working on damselflies, to fisheries management, talking at various occasions around how genetic tools, for instance, can be used to more sustainably manage our fishery stock. Here, for instance, talking at Parliament. And I've also have been working a lot on how we can diversify the species that we farm in New Zealand, maybe adding some warm water species to what we can currently farm to help with climate change mitigation. 2 years ago, I became a professor, and honestly, if you put all of these different chapters on a CV or on a slide like this, it looks like that. And it looks really linear, because it only shows the paths that were taken, right? And I think it can actually look really intimidating to others. And I wanted to say something about it, because I think that is not really the most realistic way to present this, because I think in reality it looks a lot more like that, because like this is more like a squiggly tree, because to be honest, there were many paths actually available to me that have opened. Some I've walked down, some I haven't, and the decisions that led to that had much more to do with the timing, the people around me, and maybe the life stage I was in. And some really popped up unexpectedly, like returning to New Zealand, for instance. So I think there is sometimes a bit less strategic thinking behind it than we often assume. And so some things I want to share with you just to sum this up. Looking back at my career, some reflections. I would definitely say to anyone, if you're thinking about a career, whether it's in science or somewhere else, definitely follow what genuinely sparks your curiosity and gives you meaning, because that will give you later on in life the energy to push through with things. I also think that from my experiences, having a family and a career is definitely possible, and in fact it's quite enjoyable. I think there's nothing like coming back home to children, for instance, to decompress you from work. It's you're right there and in the real life. I would also say, and that's probably a bit more to scientists, but I think we all have to remember it's not about us, so leave your egos at the door. In science, we each just contribute a piece to a much bigger puzzle. I also have learned, especially coming back to New Zealand and working in the seafood sector, it's so important to communicate your research, and you heard that before from the other speakers, so leave the ivory tower and make your science matter, try to have an impact with it. And I think that's, again, I think for everyone is of course very important for scientists, but I think stay open to have your ideas challenged, and also be yourself critical, invite criticism, because only then we can do the best work. Criticism is a good thing. And most importantly, I think we should never forget that, have fun at work, right, and celebrate success, not just the success of yourself, but also that of others. And this is one of the last things. I think we kind of talk about our career paths, but all of this only happens because of the support around us, whether that's family, and some of my family is here, but also the teams that support us at work and elsewhere. So big thanks to all of the ones behind us. That's it. Yeah, thanks.